Hey everyone, so today I'll just go over some Raze tips and tricks that you can use in your games, as well as some general advice on how to play the character and what roles you should occupy on attack and defense, and yeah, I think most of this stuff will be pretty helpful, especially for newer players. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about, and I recommend that everyone who wants to play Raze do this, is just go to your keybinds and make sure that you have a profile set up for Raze where you have the mouse button as your satchel bind. Just because in most cases, if you want to satchel alt consistently the proper way, then you should have this. It makes it a little bit easier for you to do that. And in general, I think it's easier to react and use the satchel with this keybind, because then you can kind of use the satchels a lot more efficiently, and also when you do satchel, you have a little bit more direction with the way that you fly in the air. So whereas if you have Q, then it's a little bit hard to use the A button as well. So that's the first thing that I would definitely recommend changing if you haven't already. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, I won't really go too in depth about how to satchel in this video. There are a lot of tutorials on YouTube. But if you can't get the timing down right away, so you know, most people kind of use 2 satchels on site, but you only really need 1. Like if this is smoked off, for example, and we're taking site, you can really just do this, get some info, and most people can't hit that unless you're in really high elo. So in a lot of situations, you can really get away with just using 1 satchel if you're not really getting the timing of the double satchel down, right? So that's something that you can definitely do for sure. And I can do that really well, and I still will use this when I'm entering site a lot. So that's definitely something that you can do for sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about satchel speed. So a lot of people don't know this, but your satchel speed is basically determined by whether you have your knife out or a gun out, and if you're in the air or on the ground. So following that logic, the slowest satchel speed would be if I have my gun out and I'm on the ground. As you can see, my velocity is not that high. I don't really go that far. Compare that to if I'm satcheling with my knife out in the air. You know, I jumped a little at the end, but you do go a lot farther. So something to consider when you do peak is I would definitely, if you do like to use this peak a lot, I see a lot of people do this. Don't do it on the ground and then just do that, because you don't really go that far. I would definitely like have your knife out for a little bit of momentum, pop it, and then you can kind of take your gun out right at the end. So if you have scroll wheel for taking your gun out, you just scroll up after you satchel. So something like that, right? And then that way you do move a lot faster, and it is a lot harder for them to hit you. Another thing that you can use, and I tend to do this a lot on defense side, but is you can use your satchels as kind of an escape tool. So if you are fighting for some map control and then someone swings on you and you're not ready, you can use your satchel to get away really quickly, and that makes you a little bit more survivable, like Jet or Reyna, in the sense where you kind of have like an escape button. And it's pretty fast. Obviously, it's nowhere near as fast as a Jet Dash or Reyna E, but it's pretty good. So that's something you can start implementing in your gameplay. You know, especially if you're not really finding opportunities to use your satchels to entry onto site. This is another way that you can get a lot of value out of your satchels. Now, as a Raze player, you can definitely use the op, you know, especially on defense side, and especially if your team doesn't have a jet or a chamber. You know, there's a reason they call it the elo stick, so if you're good at using it, you can definitely use it as Raze. I would definitely try and combo it with the satchel escape thing that I just talked about. That's a really good way to make sure that you kind of stay alive as much as you can. So right, yeah. So if you're kind of holding a close angle like this, you know, you can double click and escape right away. So definitely don't be afraid to use the op as Raze.
Satchel out.
So I am going to talk a little bit now about whether you should use the Vandal or the Phantom with Raze. Obviously it does, first of all, depend on your personal preference. You know, if you feel more comfortable with the Vandal in general, then you should use that. And if you do feel more comfortable with the Phantom, then you should use that. I personally think that Raze players can benefit a little bit more from using the Phantom, just because you can really abuse run and gun with Raze. I know that sounds bad, but it's in the game, so you can take advantage of it for sure. You know, a lot of times you can literally do this, and it tends to work in a lot of situations, especially if you are lower elo. And then after you do land from satcheling, I do find it is a little bit easier to land shots in the air with the Phantom as compared to the Vandal. So that is another benefit. But like I said, go with really what is more comfortable for you. But I personally tend to use the Phantom whenever I play Raze. So generally speaking, in terms of maps that Raze really excels on, I definitely think Split is probably her best map. You can also pick Raze on Icebox and do really well. Ascent as well. Fracture, especially if there's a breach on your team. So yeah, there's a lot of maps. I think Raze is just one of the better duelists in general. You know, after Jet, obviously. So she does really well in a lot of maps where there's kind of like tight corners and you can nade. You know, especially on Split, her nade reaches a lot of areas. So maps like that, and a lot of vertical maps too, where you can kind of benefit from having her satchels. So you can get off from higher platforms or places with corners like this, and if you have a judge, stuff like that, right? So Ascent, Icebox, Fracture, Split are probably her top maps. In terms of lineups with Raze, as far as her grenade goes, you know, you don't really need to know any lineups. Obviously, you can Google it, but I generally tend to just kind of keep my nades as a reaction. So if I have info that, for example, someone is backside, then I'll just use the nade to flush it out, and then I'm ready to kind of react. Obviously, you can learn some lineups, but honestly, I don't even know that many. I kind of just use it as a get off me tool. You know, if I know that someone's pushing up on me and I have the info. But in most cases, you don't really need a lineup for grenades. As far as Roomba goes, though, I would probably try to have a couple in your back pocket that you can use, especially on CT side, defender side, so that you can kind of get a little bit of info. Like, for example, one on Split is you can kind of look down here, and then you aim up with this thing, and then that kind of just clears all of B main for you. So something like that, I think you can probably know a couple of those. They're pretty beneficial. And for attack side as well. But in general, for nades, you can kind of just throw stuff on the fly and then have a couple Roomba lineups here and there. Oh, something else I forgot to mention about your nades. You can actually combo it with your Satchel. Although sometimes I do think this is a low value play for the amount of utility you use. But for example, if I know someone's stuck there, I can nade it, and then you can Satchel right after, so that if they try to leave, the Satchel bounces them back into the nade. So you can time it, but that's something that you can do as well. You can also do it with your Roomba. So if I have my Roomba and I put my Satchel on it, I can kind of use the Satchel to make it pop, right? Again, I think that's pretty low value for the amount of the utility that you're using. So you just usually try and keep your Satchel for a way to escape, and then keep your Roomba for info. But you can combine it like that, and sometimes you can get a kill out of it, especially if you have a lot of info. Alright, so the last thing that I want to go over is just a couple of different ways to properly utilize Raze's ult. You know, so if you don't have the timing down to be consistent with the animation cancel of her ult, which looks like this, then there's a couple of other things that you can do. You know, you can look up a tutorial for that online, but it's essentially Satchel, ult, Satchel. And the timing is a little tricky, but once you know it, it's pretty much just muscle memory. So a lot of players think that if they don't get a kill with their ult, that it's kind of like a wasted ult or a Rosa, but in reality, you can get a lot of value for your team just by clearing out sight. You know, it's obviously very situational, but you can just use your ult to get a little bit of space. You know, as soon as the enemy team hears fire in the hole, they usually kind of run away. So that's one way you can use it. Another thing is, if you still want to kind of get a little bit of movement, you know, with your ult and you're not able to do the animation cancel consistently, you can pop ult and then Satchel out, and then after you use the ult, you know, you can use the Satchel to escape. Because I find that after you ult, you're usually pretty vulnerable because of the backwards recoil that the ult sends you in. So for example, like, you know, if I'm up like this, I'm pretty vulnerable now. So you can kind of use the Satchel to escape, right? So again, right, and then that way I'm a little bit harder to hit, a little bit less predictable, right? So that's something that you can do as well. You know, I'm vulnerable, and then I can kind of use the Satchel to escape, right? The timing's a little bit tricky, but that's definitely a tool that you can use. Anyway, that's pretty much for it for this video. Let me know in the comments if there's any other kind of content that you'd like to see. I can do these types of guides for quite a few agents. And if you want more Overwatch content, then yeah, let us know in the comments as well. So yeah.